Today's podcast, we have Tiffany from Gentle Spirit Equine Rescue in South Dakota. So, Tiffany, thank you so much for doing this podcast with me. I'm really excited for people to learn more about your organization because they
Thanks.
got to know just a little bit about you in the last season of Horse Rescue Heroes as you came to the workshop.
Mhm.
So, how was kind of the workshop for you, and what brought you to the workshop?
The workshop was great. So what brought me was, our rescue started off 12 years ago, 13 years ago, doing this, being a sanctuary, taking in every horse. But over time, because it's just us and it's small, we kind of got back into that problem of only helping a few horses and having to say no more than we were saying yes. And it didn't feel good and it didn't feel right. And we being that there are very few rescues in South Dakota, we had to really see how we could open it up. So what brought me to the workshop was specifically to kind of see, how do you do that? How do you get over the fears? You have a lot of fears going into opening your door to every horse. That sounds so overwhelming. And I wanted to come here from your own lips, from you guys and the other rescues that were doing it, how you're accomplishing it and kind of get past some of those last barriers to doing that, to going back to our roots and opening the doors to everybody and being able to say yes so we'd feel better about ourselves and help more.
So at the workshop, I know you were taking a lot of notes. Now you ended up being one of the organizations we didn't visit, so ultimately you didn't have a chance at that $15,000 grant in the end. But what were some of the things that you really learned from the workshop that you took back with you?
The biggest shift in thinking was that, for me, the biggest thing that was the most important was that it isn't all my responsibility. Like, we can say yes, but make it so that the owners have a little bit of impact in that decision too. I think as rescues, we want to help and we want to fix and we want to make people feel better and animals feel better. So we just take all that responsibility. If somebody would reach out to me, I would feel like I had to say yes. And then it became my problem that I was doing something bad. But what I took back from was I can still say yes, but kind of put some of the responsibility back on the owner as to how that's going to happen through like adding an intake fee, which could be waived if needed, but just different ways to make it so that yes, I can say yes to every single horse, but then it's back on the owner to make it actually happen.
Because ultimately, it's not the rescue's responsibility. We're here to help, but if we're not running our organizations properly and like with a business model, we will fail or we won't be able to make the biggest impact that our organization could.
Yeah, and it's so emotionally draining to say no all the time and to have all the
Mhm.
requests you get and just to feel that responsibility for every horse when it's truly not your true responsibility. It's that just leads to burnout and compassion fatigue and all the things that make it hard to continue to actually make a difference and move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So after the workshop, you headed home, and it sounds like you started implementing a lot of the things that you learned. So, kind of how has it been since the workshop for your organization and changes that you might have implemented?
It's been really good. Now, we also had some other things going on, including a trainer's challenge, but we did come home and immediately put in a plan. It took us about a month to figure out how we were going to accomplish it and how we wanted to do it. And then we put in a plan and we immediately opened the doors up. We immediately started going to auction, which was something we've done in the past, but it's a touchier subject up here. We're a pro auction state. People really feel like you're kind of insulting them if you go to auction. But we started immediately and saw massive support from our supporters for that, which was a shock because even just 2 years ago, we could barely get any support if we went to auction, and we
Mm-hmm.
just saw massive. So um, we more than doubled our intakes last year, which was huge, and at the same time had like almost 3 times as many outtakes as adoptions and such. So that was really, really good. We feel like we helped so many more. Um, there's so many more to help. We
Mm-hmm.
did really do that. And I think one of the biggest takeaways we had was we got over a lot of our fears of that opening the door to everybody, the open door surrender policy. Owners have reached out and helped. Everybody's been willing to uh, uh, take that responsibility for their horse. We've had really no pushback on the intake fee at all. We've had to waive it a couple of times, but it's been great. It's been really open, and I think we feel like we're invigorated. We were kind of at a plateau before we came, and I think that's something we talk about at the workshop. We were at a plateau, and we've really started to see things go up again. Um, it was really a good year, and we really got over a lot of that stuff. So.
Well, that's
Looking forward to this year.
yeah, well, that's really exciting to hear about the changes within like your donor base,
Mhm.
getting behind you and really supporting. I think a lot of times rescues get very stagnant and you're saying no constantly, you're caring for the same horses constantly. Some you're afraid to adopt them out because what happens if, they fall through the cracks again. And as shelters, really putting that responsibility on the person who is responsible for the horse and saying like, look, we can help you, but this is what it's going to take for our organization to help, is just something that rescues are like, we can do that. And I'm like, yes, you can, and you can help more horses, because so many times rescues turn horses away and there could be like a $2,000 donation attached to that horse, and you would be able to care for that horse. And maybe it needs medical attention, or maybe it's very adoptable. So, but it's great to hear that financially people are behind the auction rescues and wanting to save them from slaughter. And so many people just totally dislike what's happening with the slaughter pipeline, and a lot of education has come up around the slaughter pipeline in the recent years. And I think that's probably part of the funding shift too with donors, is they're becoming educated and they're like, well, we don't want that to happen. So that's excellent to hear.
Think one thing geographically that we already had was our state is extremely pro slaughter, which sucks as a
Mhm.
rescuer. Our governor, Christy Nome, is somebody who regularly speaks in support of slaughter or against the Safe Act in Congress when she was actually in
Mhm.
Congress. So it's been like that's been a barrier we've had to overcome is for a lot of our state that's like pro, that's just what you do. They go to
Mhm.
slaughter and they're very open about it. It's never been a, oh no, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It's been tough. And of course our state is also run as a cattle state. It's run by the Cattlemen's Association,
Mhm.
which puts a lot of money versus against say the Safe Act and against all of that. But even that, when we go to auction, or as we've spent all this time developing relationships where we're respected for what we do
Mhm.
and we have the support going in, and so it's a really kind of a weird line to walk, but that was kind of why we had trouble in the past when we'd go to auction. We'd get told that we were just, there's no bad horses there. That's just, it's just the way it is. We just get told so many things that we couldn't go and the money wasn't there. So it's been really nice to see the support. And it's been really nice to see as we spell it out why we raise extra or why how much it costs, that people don't even question it. They understand it because we're really, really transparent, like about what it costs to bring in a horse like that.
Yeah, that's excellent. And one thing I think that, because we're starting to do a lot of lobby work and
Mhm.
things, and the fact that horse meat is toxic is something
Mhm.
that, if they're pro slaughter on any of this fact, you want people to eat toxic meat. It really takes
Yeah.
the thunder out from under them, because there's a wonderful study now by the Veterinarian AVMA Association that horse meat is toxic. And
Mhm.
they used to be like more pro slaughter, and now they've withdrawn that stance because horses are given so many drugs, bute and all these things that are fine for animals as pets, but they're not for animals intended for human consumption.
Yeah, that's been an argument we've used quite a bit in our state for years is the toxicity and the drugs because cattle ranchers understand that. They understand what they have to track in their cattle. They have to track every antibiotic, every drug they give them. And there's massive fines if they don't do that. So coming back and saying, well, look at all the work you guys put in. Look at all the money you have to put into this. And horses don't have any of that. And that really does get their wheels clicking. Once you take the emotion out of the argument, and aren't in their face talking about how, I mean, we care about how inhumane it is because we know how inhumane it is. But once you take the out of the argument with them and just get into them about the toxicity and, you know, it's not fair to put that out into the world. It's kind of, a bad thing to think of like, oh, well, we're just sending it to third world countries. Well, they shouldn't be eating toxic meat either. So it really comes back to that responsibility of if you own an animal, you should be responsible for the care of it, no matter how long you own it. If you're a trader and you have a horse for a week and they need vet care, you need to get them vet care. It's responsibility for any animal that you take care of, that you've taken ownership of.
And I think with the whole cattlemen association, and then you have, those that are worried about the horses, it's always kind of collided And I think if more awareness can be brought out about the toxicity of the horse meat in the long run, I think that that will help them realize, like this isn't a battle that's trying to take their livelihoods away. This is, protecting horses and also protecting humans from the
Right.
meat. And I think that ultimately could run. And I do really feel like, I know the SAFE Act has been out there forever, but I really do feel like this time, they're just adding equines to an already existing dog and cat law. And I really feel like that could be the changing point where actually the SAFE Act gets passed, which will be very interesting because it's not tapping into anything. It's just adding equines to an already existing law.
What's interesting to me about visiting Tennessee, for example, and watching your YouTube and everything is the horses you guys get at auction. Because they never get taken into auction here. The auction houses won't allow those come through. They follow the laws, not necessarily Safe Act, but they follow the transport laws. You won't see fully blind horses. You won't see horses that can't walk. You don't see them quite as critical or nearly as many critical cases as we see in Tennessee there. It's surprising because usually I think up here in the Dakotas we're kind of, 50 years behind in a lot of it. But when it comes to that, we're not. And they will send them out to the vets. They will have the vet provide care at auction if they are there, but they tell them to go home and feed their horses. They tell them what to do. And it's not an automatic, oh yeah, I've got a horse that's got a broken leg, I'm just going to take it to auction and get those last, $100 for them. They actually are, the pressure's put on for them to give them the care they need and euthanize them at home if it's not what it needs to be.
Yeah, Tennessee is like a straight shot to Mexico in the slaughter pipeline. And a lot of these auctions, they do have standards. And part of the reason they have standards is, they're wanting horses that could actually ship in good quality of health to the slaughterhouse. Um, and you have laws like Pennsylvania, and they're like, no, we're not accepting horses in this condition. And then, in your state as well. And there's auctions across the United States that are like, no, we don't want horses like that coming into our facility. And then you have Tennessee that's just like this open gate. And I feel like there's so many horses from across the United States that come through Tennessee on the
Mhm.
slaughter pipeline because Tennessee's laws are so laxed and they know that they can bring them here and nothing's going to happen. And so definitely working on trying to get those laws changed, because until laws change, I mean, we've been doing this for 20 years and we haven't seen change, really. I mean, like there was slaughterhouses in the United States. They got shut down because, I mean, there was blood rolling down the streets from the slaughterhouse. I mean, it was just
Right.
a horrible, horrible industry that was shut down because it couldn't operate properly. Um, and here we are, fast forward, horses are still going to slaughter. Horses are still being neglected and abused. And it's like, it really is going to come down to actually changing the laws. And then law enforcement can actually do something, because until the laws get fixed, um, you might call, hey, there's some skinny horses or there's this. And if there's no laws that they can actually read and be like, oh yeah, that that horse is skinny, there's a law against emaciated, okay, we know what to do now. It's just going to continue to be a rampant abuse and neglect. And that's why we need organizations out there like yourself doing what you can and being that open admission. Yes, we can help you, and this is what it costs our organization.
Think another factor to that is just having rescue organizations that can help law enforcement too, because
Mm-hmm.
and you have to have somewhere for the horses to go. And our state is very large, but has a minimal population. And in our counties, we have a lot of very, very poor counties. So they don't have the funds in their budget to take the horses in and such. So being that resource that law enforcement can reach out to, the more rescues work with law enforcement and help to show their reasonableness and their willingness to help, the more they're willing to, even the bare laws that are on the books, they're willing to enforce them. So that's also a huge part of what we try to do up here, is to be very open to working with law enforcement and being non-judgmental and just going in and helping the horses, because at the end of the day it's all about getting those horses into a better situation. um, Many years ago, when there was either no rescue or lulls between it, they literally, law enforcement would literally take them to a feedlot at an auction
Mhm.
and they would rehab and then be auctioned to slaughter. So, it's like, well, that's just, to me, that's heartbreaking that that was what happened to so many of them. It's like, well, that wasn't any better. In fact, in some ways worse. If they would have just euthanized them at home, at least they wouldn't have gotten better and had a little bit of hope. And then, oh, off you go. you know,
It's very
Bad.
frustrating. It's very frustrating. And I remember it was in the early part of 2000s, in California, we were going to an auction and it was rough, but it was nowhere rough. I mean, if I had walked into Tennessee back then, I'd been like, ah. But there were bad things that happened at that auction. And this one day, animal control was there with a horse trailer. And I'm like, yes, something positive's going to happen. And, they're here. Maybe they're going to help that skinny, emaciated horse here or something. And then I watched them unload horses off their trailer and consign them at the auction. I went to talk to them. I'm like, what's going on? Like horses are being sold for slaughter here. And they're like, well, we just don't have anywhere to send these horses. And she's like, I hate this. It makes me sick. And I'm like, we can take the horses. And it was too late for those horses. But ultimately, that did make a relationship going forward where we did take all their horses. Cause she's like, we have to hold them. We have to feed them. We watch them rehab. We get them nice and fat for slaughter. And then we take them to the auction.
Right. Right. And it's
And
heartbreaking.
it's just a broken system. But I would love to see within the Full Circle Life Horse Shelter Network someday, like a network that's set aside for helping law enforcement within these organizations. Because I mean, really, within a day's drive, we can all get to each other somewhere within the network.
Right. Right.
And if we can make a really solid law enforcement program, things could really start changing from the law enforcement side, because most of them don't want to touch it even if the laws are there, because they're like, where are we going to put these horses? I mean, we've held horses for like 4 years in a court case before, and the county couldn't give us any money for it. They have no funding for their animal programs because they don't have animal programs. So
Right.
that's rough.
It is. It is. And I think a big part of that is just a lot of states and law enforcement think that their only option is to sell to recoup their costs. And if you can step in as a rescue and help take some of those costs off their shoulders, so to speak, or get raise donations and account for them. There's a lot of ways to help, but almost every state has laws that say it doesn't have to go to auction. They can go to humane societies. They can
Mm.
go to other people. It's about helping to mitigate those costs and make it a lot easier for the county to not have to go back and say, well, we have to sell these horses because we have X thousand dollars into them. So that's a huge thing.
It can add up quickly. And most seizures are not just one horse. It's like the
No,
herd of horses.
up here, it's 20 to 35 to 40. It's very rarely. I think we've had one seizure over the years where it was one tiny mini, and that one was simple. That county was on top of things because they had it. It was an abandoned mini that hadn't had hoof care in years, and they had us in court in like 2 weeks, and it was adjudicated ours within a month, and because it was adjudicated abandoned, so that one was a great case, and we kind of show that to the other counties of how it can be done quickly, so you don't have to sit on them for months. Around here, we're pretty lucky. All of our seizures so far have resolved within usually 6 months, but I'm sure the case is coming where somebody's going to drag their feet. But they like to get them taken care of pretty quick. So
That's good. That's good, because it's really hard when rescues do take in horses a lot of times, because sometimes you can't talk about it publicly. And it's like, okay, we have this herd of horses. We're feeding them, and we can't be showing them and asking for donations for them. So that can be really rough depending on the case.
yeah, we're pretty lucky in our state. That's not a concern. Hasn't been. We've had one case where we chose not to share the information because it was looking like it could be a pretty contested one, and they were gypsies, so gypsy vanner horses. So kind of a contentious case all around. But we had the choice whether we shared the information about them or not. But luckily, our state that has not been a thing yet. So far, you've been able share, and get the stories out, because that's what matters, getting the stories out, which is another part of what came back from the workshop, was just trying to improve the storytelling. You got to tell their stories. And I think that's something we've always done. Like we've always tried to make it that people fall in love with every horse we have so that they want to take it home, or they want to come and meet them, or they want to sponsor them from afar because they feel like they know this horse. Like right now it's Valentine's week. So we're featuring 4 of our super bonded couples that are permanent residents here. So it's like our 2 35-year-olds that are, attached at the hip. There's a contest going on. So they get to know these horses, and they get to know all the adoptable horses. And so when they come, they have a really good idea of who they're picking up or who we have. And that helps so much. And we took a lot away from the workshop too on just improving our storytelling and getting more work out, more reach, and being not scared of video, for example, telling more video stories, trying to do more on the different platforms, things like that. That was another thing that was super helpful.
Have you seen an increase in donations since telling the stories?
I, Last year was a bigger year than previous years, so I would say yes.
Mhm.
But I also think, we also implemented going to auction, and we also implemented being very vocal about being open door and taking and wanting to take an open surrender. So there were a lot of things that happened last year. I don't know that we've been as good yet getting all of the video out there. I think we will see more. I think this year we'll see more because we're putting more of an emphasis on that. I think it will help quite a bit.
Nice, nice. Well, we're very happy that people can come and take things that work here at Horse Plus and put it into their own organization. So, um, a lot of the different organizations that came, like they were featured a little bit, and then some of the organizations we actually went to and did a whole little video on them. But I would love for people to know more about your organization because you have fantastic programs and you're kind of in a desolate area where there's not a lot of horse welfare resources. So, because I know you have a lot of education programs and then the training challenge is awesome. So, kind of like tell us about some of your programs.
Yep, we definitely are in an interesting state because South Dakota and North Dakota are 2 states that have a lot of horses with very few people. So I think the last time I saw the numbers, Wyoming had the most ratio to horses to humans. We have like 6 humans to every horse, whereas states further east might have 60 humans for every horse. So we have a lot of horses, not a lot of people. So there's not a lot of resources either. And when we've talked with larger groups like the ASPCA or any of those, they've said, well, we can't even get in your state. So there is no animal welfare here at all. So it's all kind of is pretty desolate. It's pretty lonely at times, which is another reason we wanted to be a part of the organization. We have been around since 2010. That's when we actually became a rescue, other than just a sanctuary, private family working together. We have done all sorts of things. We started out obviously just rehabbing and rehoming horses. We've grown over the years because there's so little resources. We have to really focus on education. So we developed a kids program. We have the Bug Club educational children's program. And we call it the Bug Club because the first horse that was part of it was 16-2. He was this giant quarter horse, but you could put a 2-year-old on him and he'd just tootle around a pen with them. And we'd always say, oh, Tommy's got a bug on his back. So our kids are referred to as bugs. So they come out, there's a monthly newsletter for them with educational topics. And then they come out once a month all year long for hands-on days. And each month has a different topic. So for example, May, we do horse health. We teach them vitals, how to check those things, why we give vaccines, what is a normal heart rate. We teach all that. We teach anatomy, and they just learn every month a different care topic. So we feel like, especially in our area, it's really hard to change the opinions of adults. But if you can educate the youth, then long term, you'll make a significant impact in horse welfare because it's not just about today, it's about forever. So that's one of our favorite things is our Bug Club program. And that starts up next month again. In our early years, we were silly enough to attempt to do it in winter, but winters are epic. So we don't do that anymore. Someday maybe we'll have a heated arena and we can have it during over year, but for now we don't. So we have that.
So
Also,
how many kids do you have come in through this program like in a year? And then kind of like since since the beginning of it, how many kids and are they still involved within your organization?
It averages probably 60 to 80 kids a year, not per month. Per month, we average anywhere from 12 to 20 kids that actually come for the monthly day. But throughout the year, it's about 60 to 80. Um, Repeat is probably about half of that. So they'll come for a couple of years. So probably we add an extra 30 to 40 kids every year. I would have to do the math, and I'm not good at doing that in a hurry, but that's a lot of kids. Sometimes they'll come once and that's it, but that's okay. But a lot of them do stick around. And we do have others that once they grow out of it, once because it's for 3 to 13-year-olds. So once they turn 14, they become what we call fly swatters because it's cute. And then they just take on more of a leadership role. Usually by the time they're 12, 13, if they've been here a couple of years, they are helping with the younger kids. But then they take on more of a leadership role, come out for and spend weekends or do more volunteering. We have a couple that are on, say, our farrier team that come out and help catch them. So they do that teenage year thing. And that also opens them up to being a part of our trainers challenge. We do have a trainers challenge every year. It's only our third year. So it's new. We call it the Dakota Showdown Horse Trainers Challenge. And that's trying to show the world that rescue horses are simply a product of their environment. They're not bad. They're not all um, in horrible condition. They don't all have reasons for being in rescue. Sometimes they're just wrong place, wrong time. So getting the horses with trainers for a summer and then competing and finding them homes is another big way we're trying to get that word out there that these are really good horses that have every potential with just a little bit of work, usually.
I think that is something important that you brought up is, this concept that rescued horses are bad horses. And that is something within the Full Circle Life Horse Shelter Network that we're trying to instill within organizations is listen to your veterinarian. And if this horse has quality of life issues, don't try to shove it off into somebody else's home that's going to have to deal with these quality of life issues. And I think for so long it was like, well, it's a rescued horse, it's lame, it's okay. But that horse is in pain if it's lame. What's causing that pain? If it's chronic pain, is it suffering from severe arthritis and it's just getting worse? There's all these different things that, if people can actually take the time to evaluate a horse and work with their veterinarian, figure out why, so there's reasons horses end up in the slaughter pipeline. And, we see a lot of them in Tennessee because they're brought in by the truckloads. And, just really, adopting out these amazing, beautiful animals and working with the vets on the other side of it, I think is so crucial because then people are adopting out horses that are going to go out and live amazing lives and be great ambassadors instead of like, oh great, you got a rescued horse. Yeah, I had one too, and I had to put it down because it had this huge heart murmur and they never told me about it. And just taking the time to really work with your veterinarian with those horses and being transparent. Adopting out a horse with a medical condition is not a wrong thing to do, but if it's there and you're just trying to push it to get it out of your rescue so you don't have to have it there, that's when those big problems come in, and then it just nobody wants the rescued horse.
Yep, absolutely. And we've seen that too. I think we've always taken a lot of pride in, especially where we are, that multiple vets will tell people that we're reasonable. Now, do we have horses that have maintenance? Of course. And
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we
Mm-hmm.
tell people when it comes to the decisions about what you're willing to maintain or what you're not, it really depends on your organization and what you have for support and what the community expects and all of those. But there's definitely a line. Like, can heaves be managed? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Is it bad enough that you're constantly having to keep them in a stall or giving them a steroid all the time? Then maybe that's not management. Maybe that's something a little more. Now, we have a lot of luck managing some conditions, but you have to know when you're not managing it anymore. You can
Mm-hmm.
keep an animal pain free for a certain amount of time, but is it long term? Is it really just depends on how it fits into your organization. Prior to ever coming to the workshop, you probably don't know this, but I reached out to Cindy at Ponytails after the first year because we were already talking about doing open door shelter days. That's back in those days. We
Mm-hmm.
were going to reach out to you for that, but then talked to Cindy way back then, but we didn't feel we were ready. But what we spent those couple of years doing was building up, we call it a pasture pal program. Like, we do get a lot of older horses. We do get a lot of very happy, healthy older horses. We took in a 36-year-old in December who is even after all of the pushing of what's best for a 36-year-old, where they should probably be let go nicely at home with their owners that love them in their home, because it's hard on to change them. They said, well, no, this horse is different. And you know what? She actually is. She is
Sure.
probably has more life than everybody. And I mean, I would put her in a pasture pal home. They have to be aware it's a 36-year-old. This is their hospice home. And we've had a lot of good support for that around here. So we're lucky in that regard that even if we get a 25-year-old in, I took in two 25-year-olds this weekend whose owner died. And I already have people asking, would this be good for my grandkid? Would this be, so we spent a lot of time building that pasture pal program. But yes, the key is 100% being open and honest, getting them vetted, first of all, making sure you know what's actually going on. Like, are they lame? Is it arthritis? Is it a fused joint? If it's a fused joint, they're not in pain. So, because you can block them and see that. And maybe that's okay. Maybe there's a pasture pal home for one that has a fused joint. But if they're in pain, you block them and all of a sudden the limp's gone, then, well, is there a treatment? And is it right for that horse? You have to, there's so many things that go into that. And sometimes I don't think people give us credit, us, the general rescue world, credit for thinking all those things through, not only for that horse, but for everything involved. The decision, you could have two horses with identical situations in front of you, and the right thing for one might be euthanasia, and the right thing for the other might be treatment, but you have to know which one is
Yeah.
correct.
And I think, I mean, there's just no black and white in the rescue world. You can't be like, well, this horse is fine, this one, like, and you can see a picture of a horse online and be like, I remember that one there was recently, it came in, I think it was through one of our buyout programs, but gorgeous looking horse, up to weight. And I'd post a picture like, she was one that we had to give the last act of kindness to. And there was people jumping up and questioning it. And then I showed a video of that horse trying to walk. And they're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh. And there's so many people that are just, they don't understand because they've never been in our shoes. They've never
Right.
been beside veterinarians next to hundreds of different horses, seeing those exact same situations like you brought up, and what's okay for one horse is not okay for the other. And that's just, I think, something that a lot of young rescues coming into it don't have enough knowledge, and they don't have the mentors beside them to help them. And the veterinarians can be very like not knowing where they're coming from, like do they have an unlimited budget and they're going to do everything to the last breath, or is this like I feel really sad, and my heart goes out to a lot of veterinarians wanting to help rescues, because there's a lot of rescues that they don't give veterinarians credit and they don't listen to them. And I think
Right.
that is really hard when rescues are like, they know better than the veterinarians. And if you're a
Um,
veterinarian going to that situation, you're not going to want them to be your client.
no, no, you have to be very respectful. We actually changed vets last year because we'd moved. So we have a whole bunch of new vets, and that's been quite the experience of getting to know them and having those questions. I do love one of the vets we use, one of the bigger clinics, and they always come in and they say, so what's the goal for this horse? Like, is this horse, we had one that had cancer in the vulva, and it was like, what's the goal? Like, do you want her to be a breeding horse? And we're like, no, her
Mhm.
goal is to be a riding horse if possible, and all this. So it's like, I love that attitude. If you look at the horse, and again, what's right for them. We have several blind horses, for example, and some of them adjust really well and some don't. And you have to look at that horse, and that
Oh,
horse
I
is
know.
what's right for each horse. And I think that's the hardest part is you can't.
Blind horses, my heart goes out to them because they're taken to auctions and they're running into walls, and it just makes me cringe. And there are some blind horses that come to us and they are able to adjust beautifully and they're very relaxed in their environment. And then you have other horses that are just terrified,
Mhm.
and we have to make euthanasia decisions on those horses that are just, they're living in fear and they're not adjusting to it. And it's heartbreaking because, and then people are like, well, you let that blind horse live. And it's like, you have no idea until you're next to those horses and you're with them every day. But blind horses, oh,
Right.
my heart just goes out to them because it's so sad what they go through, and nobody gives them the respect they deserve. And I'm so glad that there's that blind horse out there that's, he's doing all these amazing things on the internet.
Endo
Endo,
the
like
blind horse.
he is
Yep.
such a great ambassador for blind horses. And not every blind horse can do what, he can do, but his owner has so much faith, and I wish more horse owners would have that level of commitment when their horses are struggling, to stand by their horse and treat them the same and still do all these amazing things. Because so many times blind horses, they start going blind and people just throw them away, and it's heartbreaking. But yeah, I have a huge soft spot in my heart for blind horses. It breaks my heart because we see so many of them, and it's just like, oh.
One of our best blind horses, or one of our best horses that works with volunteers and the kids, is fully blind, and he's been fully blind since he was 2, from an accident at his first owner. And he's, I think he's like 18 now. We've had him for about 8, 9 years, and he is just perfectly safe. You can take him out and ride him around the section with nobody else. He's amazing. He's really amazing. And so we do try, especially in our kids program, that is something we're not afraid to use the blind horses in that, because we do feel like horses like to have something to do. Yes, they're perfectly content eating grass and pasture and doing nothing. Don't ever feel like, we don't like hearing that, oh, I can't ride my horse anymore, so I don't have time, so I don't keep them. You should still keep them, but they do still like having something to do sometimes. So we try really hard to bring blind horses that are suitable into that program. Of course, they can't be adjusting, and we tend to give them time. Luckily, again, that goes back to the differences between some of our states. Like, you don't see blind horses at our auction because they supposedly can't be legally transported to slaughter. But that doesn't mean they can't go to other auctions, or they can't go to horrible places. And they still get them across the border. They
Yeah,
do.
they do.
It's
Mm-hmm.
but our auctions, at least up here, the big signs, no blind horses, so that we don't see them there. But that kind of makes you wonder, where are they?
Yeah, where are
Are
they?
they? Where are
Where are
they?
they?
Where are
Yeah,
they? Are
they're
they?
probably coming to Tennessee to the auction.
Probably. That is something we're spreading in our area too, is learning, because now that we're going to auctions, we sit next to the different broker lots. We sit next to the buyers that are hauling them to the Billings auction, or hauling them to you, or hauling them to Oklahoma. They are there. They're here in our state. So we always encourage rescues, especially if you're just starting out. You don't have to go to those lots. You can go to your small auction and get where it has maybe 5 horses, and you can help those horses, because those 5 horses are going to end up
They're going to end up there
in
eventually.
Oklahoma or in
Yeah.
Tennessee or somewhere bigger. They're not,
The
it's
pipeline is
pipeline
just
starts here.
crazy. It's crazy how immense and huge it is, and all the different, like, you have all the little traders, and I don't really feel like the traders are actually making that much money from one auction to another. They're just getting them to these bigger auctions where the actual big kill buyers are, and then those guys, they're shipping hundreds of horses, and they're definitely doing quite well. Um,
Yes.
but with the blind horses, I'm gonna go back there because I loved blind horses. But there was this one when I was growing up, I listened to a lot of cassettes. And if you don't know what cassettes are, you can Google it. But the rest of us, I think, know what cassettes are. And I would listen to these trainers talking about how to train horses and whatnot. And I remember this one story where this guy had trained this horse, and then it was like 10 years, um, and like he met this horse 10 years later after he'd trained it, and he was like, oh, I remember training that horse, and it was at a stable, and the guy's like, oh, you should take him out and go for a ride. So he took him out, he saddled him up, took him in the little arena for a little bit, and then went on a trail ride, and he went up and over some hills, and crossed the train tracks, and just did everything, came back. He's like, oh, wow, yeah, this is so great. Did a good foundation on this horse and whatnot. And then as he was untacking it, somebody was like, hey, he's blind. And he's like, there is no way he's blind. And he went and checked his eyes, and sure enough, and he's like, he just blew him away, because I think so many people go into blind horses with a preconceived idea that they can't do this and this and that. And so that story has stuck with me like all of my life, because it's so true. It's so true. Blind horses can do anything. There are some that can't adjust to it,
I'd
but
say the majority of them can do just anything, and you'll
yeah,
never know. If you
you'll
drove
never
into
know.
our pasture, and if you came here and we were showing you, unless I pointed out the ones that were blind, you probably couldn't pick them out
Yeah.
unless you were close enough to see their eyes, because they live in their own pastures. We have a specific blind paddock, but they just sometimes you forget.
Yeah.
The horse that inspired me personally was a horse that I took in from another rescue, and he was deaf and blind on one side and was covered in scars and fractures and all these
Aw.
things. But and when I got him, it was totally a spur of the moment situation where I just saw for a minute he just needed somebody to trust him, and I wasn't looking for a horse. I still thought you had to own a farm to own a horse at that point. I didn't know a thing about boarding barns or anything. So I'm like, I don't own a farm. What am I doing? But he taught me all of that. He taught me that sometimes they just need time. They can do so much. And he ended up getting cancer on his eyelid. And to
Mm.
save that eye, I took him to the University of Missouri in Columbia. And um, when we were in there, like 2 weeks prior, he had taken a 12-year-old over a jump course at a local show. So we could jump him, you could trail ride him, you could do so much. And what was cool is when he was there, this neurosurgeon from Europe, from England, came by and like came back. He's like, "You're gonna let me evaluate him." And he took him out and he told me he was amazing. And he took like video and pictures and taught about him because of how well adapted he was. Because we don't it's more now. This is 20 years ago. 20
Yeah.
years ago, people didn't think that horses could adapt like they can and
Mhm.
didn't realize what they could do. And it does come down to what you said. Some of them adapt really, really well and really quickly. Some of them are in so much terror when it happens that you have to look at every horse as an individual. And experience is definitely something that is impossible to learn. You learn so much. We look back at things 10, 12 years ago and think, gosh, if only we had the experience and the knowledge now, maybe we could have saved that horse, or maybe we could have done
Mhm.
more, or maybe that horse that we couldn't load on the trailer would now be on the trailer. There's so many things that experience is so helpful for that. Unfortunately, it also gives you where you can very quickly look at a horse and kind of just know,
Kind of
you
know.
know,
And I think people
kind of
can take
know.
that
And
as like, oh, they're making a judgment call too quickly. And I mean, like we've had over 12,000 animals come through our organization, and you get to know things. And I remember this one draft horse that came through, we purchased him at auction. He was super, super lame. He couldn't put hardly any weight on his foot. And the vet, Doc, he's retired now, but he was just an awesome vet we had at the shelter here in Tennessee. And he watched the horse walk, and he's like, that horse doesn't have a coffin bone. And I was like, that's wildly bizarre. And I didn't realize this until I went back and watched our episode that he had really said that. And it really sunk in because we took the x-ray and that horse didn't have a coffin bone. And when you're around animals long enough and you see all these things, you pick up on these things that only comes through experience. But
yes, we actually have a horse here from a neglect case, a large one, the a Mustang. What should I call it? She wasn't really a sanctuary, but she had 900 horses, and it was
mm,
huge. And we have one here. We got him when he was only 4 months old. He failed to develop the majority of the coffin bones in his hinds,
mm,
and that was a case. We ended up taking him to a specialist out in Wyoming, and he's 8 years old now. He's surviving and he's doing well, but now that he's full size, full grown, every year we've just kind of had to keep
have to
reevaluating.
readjust. Hmm.
He's really done well, and he's again another case that has been taken all over the world. His x-rays have been everywhere, and so our goal with him was, if we can keep him happy, healthy, and sound as he can be, then fine, he's got a home here. Obviously not adoptable, but we have
Yeah.
the ability. But he also has taught so many, so it's good for him. Now
Hmm.
at 8, we're watching him pretty closely because he's got
You just have
some
to watch
tendon
it.
issues. Now that
Hmm.
he's getting big, it's like, oh, are those legs? We're hoping those legs will
Yeah.
continue to hold out, but we also aren't going to let him, sit there and suffer just because we
Yeah.
love him so much.
Just a case by
I
case
think
basis. And I feel like if an animal is born with a condition, it's so much better off than like an injury where
yes,
like that's where they grow up and they're like that. And like your horse's case, like that's a very unique case, but he was also born that
extreme
way. It
right, and
wasn't
their hinds.
neglect and injury.
So or founder, like
Mhm.
the difference in like a horse, his x-rays look very much like he might have had founder wearing them away, which is extremely excruciatingly painful, and you're not going to put a horse through that. His was never painful because
Yeah.
that's how he was born. So yeah, it's, if you just look at his x-rays, if you don't look at it all, it could be different, but then you still have every day you're worrying, and it's like, am I making the right decision when you do allow certain ones to stick around, or when you
Mhm.
do give them whatever option. But um, yeah, those are our hard ones. And I don't think, again, that's something I think we don't talk about in rescue very often, is that I think every rescue probably has at least one horse that they just walk that line regularly. I always have a list of
Mhm.
horses I'm watching their quality of life, and their,
Yeah.
adoptable horse, doesn't matter who they are. If they've got, yes, we might be able to find a horse for a home for a horse with founder, um, but if they're foundering all the time, or if
Yeah.
they're have uveitis, maybe that's manageable. But if they're having a flare up every 6 weeks, at some point you have to be like, this is no life. This is a
Yeah.
horrible condition,
Yeah.
to
No,
live with,
it's
or
so
something.
hard.
So
And I heard someone once put it really well when on the euthanasia topic is if you're really thinking about it a lot, it might be time.
yeah.
Because it's almost like the horse is not that it's telling you, but it's telling you through signs of its
Mhm.
body of being like, all these different things. And I was like, that's so true because so many times, like when a horse is happy and healthy and everything, it's really not crossing your mind at all. But then when you start seeing those things, it's like, hmm. And I always like, one last good summer, for some of these older horses that come in and it's like, just let's give them one last good summer. And,
Yeah.
we had some horses that, had cancer and these other chronic medical problems. And, it was three of them. They were all very bonded. And we let them have one good last summer. And if we could have found a home that could have taken on all those medical problems, it might have been, but you're working with your vet. It's such a, there's no
Yeah.
black and white. It's like, the cancer could get really worse. And, it's so confusing, but just giving them that one last good summer is such a gift, I think, for so many. But
Well, and that's a huge consideration where I am, because
mhm,
winter's hard on all of us, horses, humans, it doesn't matter. When it's 40 below with wind chills of 80 below for 2 weeks straight, that's hard on arthritis. That's hard on a lot of horses. So that's a super big thing up here. And that's why we've talked about doing open door shelters. And I want to
mhm,
work with Carrie a little bit, because I do think we've been working on it for several years now, of having some kind of euthanasia clinic or a fall equine wellness clinic,
yeah,
where it's like, you have that 35-year-old that's struggling, and they hurt more in
mhm,
the winter. And unfortunately, it's pretty expensive too. So
yeah.
if we can make it easier, if we can make different options,
Yeah. If we make
that
it
would be,
easy, people will make the decision. Because whenever
yes,
a horse has a slaughter price on its head, how can you compete with, okay, you need to do the right thing for your horse? Well, I could get $600 at the auction, or I could go and pay $600 at the vet. Like
right,
that's the hard part.
right.
So your training program, I'd love to hear a little bit more of how that works and kind of like how do you choose? Does somebody win at the end? Like kind of what happens with your training program?
So we call it the Dakota Showdown Horse Trainer Challenge. And it's back to kind of combating what people think about rescue horses. We get a lot of older horses, a lot of brood mares. We get a lot of horses that just need training. So we started it so that we could do that. And it's a program where trainers apply from all over. Last year we had trainers from North Dakota, South Dakota, obviously, Nebraska and Minnesota involved, and one in Iowa. So we had all of the states around us involved, and we tried to do about 20 horses. They get to go to the trainers for the summer. We have three divisions: a pony division. We're calling it a foundation division this summer, and then the showcase division. These horses, all rescue horses. In fact, we're getting some from Colorado for this year's trainer challenge, which is great, from Colorado Horse Rescue Network and Carrie. They're all rescue horses. They all come in with their own histories, and then they go work with these trainers who volunteer for the summer, come back and compete. There's prizes, and then we do adopt them out. We do pre-approved adopters get to have an auction process on the horses, so they get to set the adoption fee, so to speak. And last year's high horse went for over $3,000, which was fabulous, because he's being ridden by an 11-year-old and working, doing fabulous things out there. And all of them just show such great improvement, and they get the attention they need, and the trainers realize that these horses are great to work with, and then the people, their clients, get to see that at rescue you can find a great horse. You just got to invest a little bit of time sometimes. um, we really enjoy it. The foundation one is for horses that are maybe a little older or have a problem. So the goal of that one is that they come out of it with a good foundation. They have ground manners. They load into a trailer. They can be handled for the vet. All the things that are going to make them safer in the
Mm-hmm.
future, and then ready to go to a trainer. Because a lot of times trainers, at least up here, a lot of trainers say, "Hey, your horse is not ready for riding, but you want me to have them trail safe in 30 days." If you can put that foundation on them yourself, or know that what to give, then that can help set the horse up. Because I think we all agree the ones that you can handle are much more adoptable, and can get homes faster and let you take in more. Because if we have to start from scratch with an unhandled 16-year-old mare who's been used to dealing with stallions and babies, it's a whole lot different from a lovely 9-year-old ranch horse. you know
Oh
so that
yeah.
9-year-old ranch horse is going to get in a home right away and let us help more, whereas the older ones, or more difficult unhandled ones, even yearlings that are unhandled, take longer than ones that at least you can put a halter on and lead. So that's been one of our funs of going to auction. Was we went to a different auction, and the fact that we could actually halter and load them like real horses was such a so different for us, because we're always getting unhandled horses. It used to be like 85 to 90% of the horses we had were basically feral and never had a halter on in their life, and that just makes it fun. We have some really good skills now. We've learned so much from them, but what a treat. What a treat to put a halter on a horse and lead it onto a trailer.
Mhm. And it is really sad how many really nice, well-trained horses are going to slaughter. But
Yes.
I'm so glad you're up there doing all this amazing work. So how can people find your website, your social media platforms, so they can start following you and the work you're doing?
Well, our website is just gentlespirithorses.org. Pretty easy there. We're most active, obviously, on Facebook, which, if you look up Gentle Spirit Horses, you should find us there. We're building YouTube a little bit. We're pretty active on TikTok. All of them are just under Gentle Spirit Horses. You can find us on all those places.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tiffany, for meeting with us today in this podcast. And I hope folks have learned more about your organization. There are links to the social media platforms in the description of this podcast. So go check it out. And Tiffany, just
I
keep
started.
up all your amazing work that you're doing up there. And it's just great to have you part of this network. And I really feel that this network in the long run can really change horse welfare and unite us
Absolutely.
and make us stronger. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this podcast.
Thank you for having me listen today. It was great. It was good to talk with you.